Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to my talk. I know you have a few other really good options up against my talk, so I really appreciate it, taking the time. I'll be presenting strategic alliances, how GRC teams can empower offensive security efforts. Basically, how GRC can work with offensive security. So this is a little bit about me. I work for the advisory services. I'm a VCSO, that dreaded word that nobody likes these days. For Lars, I'm a former QSA at Trustwave and Bell. I'm a former compliance auditor with Tenable. I'm also a former InfoSec manager with a company called Security, which is a small startup actually where I'm from, which is actually in Nova Scotia. I'm also a conference organizer, Atlantic Security Conference, Retail SecCon in Halifax, and we've just had our 12th edition in April. And this here is a fantastic conference. I just want to give a thumbs up. You put on a great show here, and I plan to come back. I'll definitely be back. I heard good things about this conference before, and now it's actually, the vibe is very much like we have at our conference. And so again, I'm a Canadian, Nova Scotia. I'm one of the few, the other Nova Scotians out there, Evan, who spoke yesterday. And also former Tenable. He's a Tenable coworker as well. So this is our agenda that we're going to have for the talk. So we're going to basically, first of all, exploring the roles, first, actually, I meant to ask this first. How many people here work in OffSec? Okay. How many actually work in GRC? Okay. How many do kind of both? There are some, yeah, okay, that's good. Yeah, okay, I was just curious about that, because yeah, there's, again, actually, I'll go back a little bit of my background as well. I came from a regular IT background. I was like a network administrator, system administrator for years, and it kind of got assigned, said, oh, this is our firewall, look after it, and that's how it kind of started. And then when I started being a QSA for a company, one of the first QSA companies I worked for, they wanted me to get my OSCP too. So I actually started it, and then I was like, no, that's not for me, I'm GRC. So that's, oh, I know. I tried, and I said no. And at the time, my manager at the time, he'd say, no, I understand. Us old guys can't do it. This is like 10 years ago. So yeah, I didn't try hard enough, and I was like, no, it's okay. I'll go the other route. We'll go through exploring the roles. Again, what does OffSec and GRC, what do they actually do? And then the potential and offensive security. So we'll talk about how you can leverage GRC capabilities to enhance any offensive security teams or projects that you would have in place. And then we'll go through risk-aware strategies for offensive security, basically try to develop what kind of tactics offensive security teams you could use that could consider identified risks, where GRC side could help identify those. And then compliance and policy alignment. That's to make sure that we'll discuss actually how security actions, offensive security, can comply with any kind of policies or regulations or frameworks that the organization would have to follow into. And then resource optimization will tell you I'll actually describe how to you can actually efficiently allocate and kind of utilize for maximum security impact, how your teams can actually work best together. And then the enhancing communication and collaboration, foster I'll go over how we can foster better communication between the two teams. And then practical steps to integration, that's pretty self-explanatory. I'll go over any kind of steps that you could actually help integrate the teams more efficiently. And then again, the conclusion, summarize the key points. Oh, and also as well, I wanted to say too, I don't mind if you have any questions while I'm doing the talk. Feel free to raise your hand and ask. I don't mind doing that at all. So again, exploring the roles. So this is OffSec. So everyone has this setup, right, at home, like all these multiple monitors. Yeah, we all do. And you all wear your hoodies, correct? Again, so the core concept, again, behind, offensive security is usually penetration testing, red teaming. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button there. And again, you kind of simulating attacks. Offensive security, they test how tough an organization's defenses are. Again, too, red teaming, that's a full-scale, kind of a full-scale multi-layer attack simulation. that see how well a system stands up against any kind of real-life adversaries. And then, of course, the usual vulnerability assessments. You just go through systems and networks to find any kind of vulnerabilities and how to remediate them. And then GRC. Yes, I don't wear a suit. I hate wearing suits. This is just seems to be the stereotypical vision that people have of GRC, government risk and compliance teams. They're kind of seen as, a lot of times the focus for, you have internal GRC teams, external GRC teams like assessors like I do. I'm an advisor for a lot of companies, and I basically work to help them build the security programs on the GRC side of things. So mainly what the focus of GRC is like regulatory compliance, make sure your organization follows any particular security frameworks or policies or regulations that you have to abide by. Like things like GDPR, HIPAA, PCI. And then also in regards, they kind of focus on risk management, spotting and assessing, kind of like and mitigating any risks that could affect the organization. And again, we mentioned control frameworks. You can set up GRC. A lot of the focus is working with control frameworks like, say, ISO 27001 or even SOC 2. And they also can provide like policy development. That's the job that nobody really likes to do. That's kind of a focus of the startup I worked with. We actually would develop policies automatically develop policies. It's a thing that no one likes to do. I know I developed them myself, and they're not exactly fun, but once you get used to it, it's fine. But that's, again, a lot of organizations hate doing them, or they'll do them and they just kind of put them in you could say the cloud drawer, and they don't look at them again. Oops. Oh, sorry about that, hit a wrong key. And also, another thing that GRC teams do that a lot of people don't realize is they do training and education. Especially in my side, I have VCSO. A lot of times we want to do like security awareness training for organizations I work with. So that's another thing they do. And again, they're considered the kind of like almost like the gatekeepers of kind of again protect the organization from any kind of like regulatory frameworks. And and again, so one thing I actually tell organizations I work with them, it's like I'm not like a lot of times people think you see an auditor come in or a GRC come in, it's like, oh no, they get scared out of what kind. I'm going through this this actually assessment framework. I have to go with all this checkbox exercise. No, we're actually here to help you. We're not here to hinder you. I kind of frame my things. I'm working with organizations. I said, I want to have a conversation about this. We're not going to go through this big, huge checklist and ask questions. And so this is talking about GRC's potential in OffSec. So again, GRC teams can play a critical role in ensuring that like offensive security initiatives or activities like vulnerability assessments could actually adhere to any kind of legal or frameworks that you have in place or you need to abide by the organization. Like say HIPAA, for example. Like GRC teams, we can ensure, or they can ensure that offensive security activities such as like phishing attacks. So you can run phishing attacks that comply with the HIPAA requirements. And also too, in regards to like compliance alignment. So GRC, by GRC can help offensive security operations by, to not only test security measures, but also ensure that they align with any particular industry regulation or standard that you need to abide by. So example, like offensive security teams could actually generate a report that has to align with a particular requirement, like say PCI DSS. Like you want to test your network segmentation in regards to a penetration test on your network segmentation. So you could actually, they want to generate a report, then actually your GRC side can take a look at it and say, yes, this is perfect, this is what we need to follow. And then strategic, or kind of like risk insights. So this is where you provide offensive teams with like a clear understanding of the organization's risk tolerance and priorities to try to help and where they should focus on. You can decide, what you can do is actually allow offensive security teams to design attack simulations that can accurately reflect any kind of potential threats such as targeting high-value like data repositories or like vital network infrastructure. Like offensive security can help you determine, the vulnerabilities for that, and then work with GRC, and GRC can actually take it back and determine the overall risk. And then framework utilization. This is where, GRC frameworks often have controls and benchmarks that kind of, again, act as a checklist. I hate to say that term, because I don't like it at all, but it basically, kind of what it is, ensures all, like, GRC, it can actually ensure that all critical areas are tested, like, again, PCI DSS requirement 11.3, or NIST 853, 800-53, that's like control CA8. So that's, again, it can help determine, exactly, GRC can help determine, say, no, you need to focus on this particular set of vulnerabilities that would affect this particular control framework or particular control. And then policy-driven testing. GRC policies, they can actually outline the scope of an extent, like the scope of any kind of offensive test that you'd actually have to do. Again, GRC can, again, they can easily tell you that, okay, this has to align with this particular framework. So you can that also determines the overall scope, let's say, of the penetration testing. So it just ensures that it actually will meet any kind of requirements you may have. And then joint security initiatives, they can, again, it's actually by working together, GRC and offensive security teams, they can, like, say, develop they can actually work hand in hand to develop a particular, like, again, strict, like, say, kind of go back to PCI DSS, especially when you can actually, they can build, like, basically build a much better security posture for the organization, knowing that they actually are kind of working hand in hand, and they both understand the overall extent and what needs to be done. And we continue on the GRC's potential and OffSec. So, again, insights from say, offensive security teams, and they do any testing, they can actually inform GRC teams about potential, like, compliance gaps. Which could lead to GRC actually learning how to focus on what they need to put in place. Again, like in regards to, we could say, trying to think of an example, say like red team exercises. They can highlight potential compliance gaps and allow them to refine, actually update like data protection, like say has to follow, like say GDPR. They can actually learn to focus, say, okay, we need to focus the personal information, and that's where we need to focus it. And again, to this whole feedback loop, you also want a constant set of, you want to have communication going back and forth constantly. So especially during the engagements where you could actually learn how to, again, generate a much better security posture for your organization. And then skill sharing. So this is when cross-training between GRC and fencing security teams could actually, they get a better idea of what, who does what, like what does GRC do, what does offensive security do? So it's actually, you want to actually have some kind of like tax simulations. You could have attack simulations. You could have, say, a red team design attack simulation where GRC could actually say, and they could actually, it's kind of like, you can even have like an internal CTF, which is created by internal red teams, and have the GRC teams go through it, so they have an idea of what you both do. And otherwise, the same thing too. Like GRC could do training for internal red teams or internal offensive security teams, and tell them, so they could say, oh, okay, this is what you do. It's perfect. And then data-driven decisions. It could actually help handle a lot of, like GRC teams, basically we handle a lot of compliance and risk data. And again, it can be analyzed to predict future attacks, especially in the age of AI-based platforms. And what it can actually do is determine what kind of data, what the focus, what do you want to protect as an organization. So actually it will allow you, so basically you would know, like say, you could determine, say, we need to protect these databases or these financial systems to make sure that, that they are secure. And then enhanced threat modeling. So has anyone ever done any threat modeling here? Yeah. A lot of people don't do it. There's some in our team at Lars. They do threat modeling. So it's I haven't done that much of it myself yet. We do have a lot of them actually started to do it. But yeah, so what basically, using threat modeling, you can use GRC data, which help offensive security like create scenarios based on real risk assessments and compliance issues that GRC would have already discovered. So yeah, so basically what you can do is the same thing too. Again, it would help you focus on what needs, exactly what your most important asset, what needs to be protected. And again, too, this kind of leads to that proactive and compliant defense. It ensures that the organization, by having both teams working together hand in hand, is very, try to basically say, probably be proactive and actually staying compliant with any kind of requirements or security controls that you need to have in place as an organization. Now we'll go through the risk-aware strategies for offensive security. So risk identification, again, us on GRC. On the GRC side, we do risk assessments all the time. So, and then after we've identified any kind of risk or compliance gaps, we could actually use that data and provide to the, like we generate, like say, a risk profile and send it and give it to the offensive security team. And then they can, in the meantime, use that data and go back and try to determine, like devise, they can go through like attack simulations, focus on particular vulnerabilities that we would have determined, that we would have discovered. And then they can do a testing on that. Like say, if again, you could test like say the resilience of like any kind of financial transactions you might have. And yes, especially that's kind of like, we're talking about like say PCI DSS. Lost my mouse here, sorry. And moving on to risk assessment. Again, we talked risk assessment. So us on GRC, like I keep talking us on GRC myself, we use kind of like both, qualitative and quantitative methods to assess the severity and likelihood of any kind of risks. Yes, it's as exciting as it sounds. And then, of course, by integrating, an example is by integrating kind of like these insights, you can actually, GRC, we can actually prioritize risk based on their assessed severity and what kind of likelihood. And we would actually be able to determine, say, okay, make this a priority risk and go to the offensive security side and say, listen, this is what needs to be, again, this is what needs to be your primary focus. And also, too, as part of that, you do any kind of, again, I kind of mentioned, you want to prioritize those risks before you'd actually mention it to, or, bring in the offensive security side. So then, say an example, say an assessment revealed a high likelihood of, like, say, phishing attacks with a significant potential impact. You can actually, again, get offensive security working out, just run those assessments, just run those simulations and see, and then review the results when it comes back. And then actually, and then again, say risk mitigation. GRC creates strategies on how to mitigate high priority risks, including like any kind of new controls you would need to put in place. So after identifying those those risks, GRC teams actually kind of like would develop a strategy, and then again they would actually share that with offensive security and bring them in to go through. And the old favorite, regulatory compliance. Basically, GRC teams, we make sure that basically any kind of offensive security activities or projects you would have going in place, they want to comply with specific laws or regulations that you have in place in your organization. You want to make sure that, like say, requirements, like say if you had to be HIPAA compliant, so you want to actually go, GRC side will go back and say, yes, we need to be HIPAA compliant for these in this particular control. So then offensive security would go back and say, okay, great, this is what we'll do. So like they say if you want to, they would actually test, say, like data access during testing, or just what controls, what kind of access controls they place that they need to try to circumvent. Lost my mouse again. Sorry. There we go. And again, this is the overall one, the goal, risk management integration. GRC teams help integrate risk management into routine offensive security activities, like ensuring you want to have an ongoing process for risk consideration. So it actually, you would want to, basically what you want to do, so each identified vulnerability that, like say, if a GRC team would discover, basically you want to like assess its potential impact and likelihood, and then you would actually involve and bring on the offensive security side. Okay. And again, this is kind of enhancing risk planning. A lot of times the risk planning is very dynamic. You don't know from one day to the next what potential risks you may have. You know, you're constantly having to review of what you want to have in place. And again, so one example of this where GRC side might actually implement a vulnerability assessment program, which involves like a risk evaluation step. So during a regular vulnerability scan, you know, offensive security would bring any kind of issues, say, okay, no, we've discovered this particular risk, and you basically want to focus it. And then come training and awareness. This is where GRC side, again, I mentioned before, we sometimes do like security awareness training. So we could actually educate others in the organization where, like say, including offensive security side. Like a lot of times you're educating like the general, like, you know, just employee base or, you know, executive level. But a lot of times you would actually want to include offensive security and just kind of bring them in. Like say you might want to do a workshop explaining, like, you know, non-compliance with things like GDPR or say ISO 27001. And again, too, we kind of go through compliance and policy alignment. Again, you want to GRC understand the regulations. So we know what needs to be protected and how offensive security should, you know, help us to protect that data. And then design implementation. So this is kind of when offensive security is actually, they're working on, say, an offensive security program internally. So GRC teams can actually help, like say if you want to run an internal penetration test or doing some red team exercises on GRC side, we can determine, say, just to make sure you don't breach any particular like privacy laws or data protection regulations. We would have a good idea of where, you know, it would help, we could actually help offensive security determine, say, no, well, you know, you don't want to actually, basically, you don't want to knock this particular side of things over. So again, too, you put the organization at risk for any kind of potential fines. And then documentation reporting. This again, too, you want to keep detailed documentation. Again, too, like the best thing in the world, especially a penetration test report, is fantastic. Like on the Lara side, our team is fantastic. Their penetration testing reports, God, some of them are like over 120 pages sometimes. Like they're you want the more verbose, the better. So again, GRC can actually help determine, like they could actually review that documentation, especially when they're, say, if you're doing internal audit, or say if you're external GRC, you're reviewing, like when you're doing PCI DSS assessments, you do have to see the penetration testing reports. So the more verbose, the better. But again, you want to actually have GRC potentially, you know, that maybe they review it as well and just determine any kind of risks that might have come out of that report. And then that kind of leads into the risk analysis portion. So again, like say before initiating a red team exercise, GRC team would kind of like analyze potential risk associated with it, and then they would determine if you don't want what would expose any kind of like sensitive customer data or critical systems, so they could actually determine, saying, no, you shouldn't be testing this part or this portion of the infrastructure. And again, you know, it's actually about collaboration with legal and IT teams. Again, GRC kind of falls into that. That's kind of one of our, you know, it's in our wheelhouse where we would actually go through and have to talk to any kind of executive level folks in the organization or the IT teams. A lot of times we could actually go through offensive security. So again, we could talk to the offensive security side and say, okay, so I'll bring those findings, and then we could actually go through there, and we know how to actually, I should say, GRC would actually know how to make the results more, I guess you could say, palatable or easily digestible for the general populace of the organization. And again, too, GRC, you have regular audits of offense. This is audit and oversight, regular audits of offensive security practices, and just to make sure that, again, they aren't breaching any regulations. Okay. And again, more research. Oh, my mouse keeps going over there. That's where it is. So again, kind of, again, consider these comprehensive risk evaluations. Again, you want to actually make sure you want to continue to do that and bring offensive security. And like say in a specific scenario, like a team may identify like a customer database critical asset due to like sensitive data. So, and then you want to make sure legacy systems like are vulnerable assets, you know, if they're actually have outdated security controls, you want to make sure offensive security is aware of that so they don't knock it over. And again, to continue to align with compliance requirements, GRC can actually, again, we kind of talked about this already, I kind of mentioned this already, but how GRC can focus offensive security. Okay, this is what you need to comply with in regards to any kind of regulations. Like you can actually, GRC can verify, like say, the pen test methodology and the scope of what you want to, of what the engagement is going to entail. Then again, it can actually help integrate integration of business objectives. This is where GRC teams can ensure like resource allocation for offensive security. It can align with their broader business objectives. Like say, if a business is expanding, you might want, like say, into doing online transactions, like financial transactions. GRC could actually prioritize that, and you know, basically, so it could actually make sure offensive security again knows exactly what they have to focus on, and that's, you know, those online transactions and the overall security of that. Then optimizing offensive security initiatives. Again, this is where offensive security can actually, based on like again, focus from for guides from GRC, you can actually, offensive security teams can focus efforts like penetration tests on areas on systems that pose the highest risk, rather than just doing like a wide swath. And GRC, again, reporting and improvement. GRC teams, like we can actually set like a set of metrics that could actually measure the effectiveness of that resource allocation. We could actually like, you could track, say like the success rate of pen tests, or which can measure how many simulated attacks are successfully detected and prevented by like the security controls they have in place. We can actually determine those ahead of time so offensive security is aware of that. And again, this is kind of talking like two targeted security measures based on prioritization. Like say, you know exactly where you want to actually focus on the most critical assets, the highest, like say, regulatory or impact. So it's actually conducting a risk assessment and considering like any kind of requirements with input from offensive security. You know, again, you want to do that risk assessment. Then when you start it, I'd love to hear from offensive security beforehand. So they would say, these are our concerns, and this is where we think you should focus on as well, based on any kind of history that they would have had. And then optimize testing schedules. So this is when GRC might actually be able to help doing testing schedules for, say, regular security assessments, like say you had to do a quarterly pen test or any kind of quarterly testing, and GRC can help that and determine that where they do from their previous risk assessments or their compliance, like their compliance assessments saying, well, you know, like say we need to do this again every quarter. Okay, then make sure that they're done every quarter. So that's where GRC can actually really help offensive security side of things, so they can actually keep that on track. So if they ever do have to go through an audit, or like say a PCI assessment, an auditor came in, a QSA came in, they know that that is actually in place and that it's being properly tested. And again, to GRC teams make sure any kind of like this is monitoring for changes. They will regularly review and update kind of risk assessments and what kind of asset prioritization, like from anything that the penetration or offensive security side is doing. And again, they'll constantly want to change and kind of those risk assessments. I consider it's very fluid. Everything is fluid when it comes to something we're doing. You have to do continual risk assessments, because if you're not, basically you're definitely going to miss something. And again, that's part of the thing about the feedback loops. You want, again, I try to refer to, you do want those constant feedback loops. You want to know, what concerns offensive security has. And again, too, I think offensive security should know what concerns the GRC teams have. Because, again, there will always be something, you will miss something if you definitely don't have that constant communication. And then maintain documentation. That's, again, too, you want to constantly do those, document every risk assessment you do, every penetration test report. It's pretty much a no-brainer. So again, if anybody comes back and say, you need to show me where your security program is, what the status of it is, just let me, so it'll actually be ready to go. Because again, that's one of the things at GRC especially, we focus on that. We make sure they have up-to-date documentation the best possible, and it's actually regularly reviewed. And again, to GRC, reporting to stakeholders. That's the one component where OffSec really, has anyone here works in offensive security, has anyone ever presented to an executive team any of kind of your work or your reports? No. See, that's the thing. A lot of times it falls to GRC to do that, especially in organizations where there's internal, like you had internal red team or internal pen testing team, internal GRC. They just want to hear from the folks that basically focus on the risk compliance side of the house, even though I think offensive security should be included. And that's one thing that's definitely should be done. Like offensive security is just important, if not more important, than GRC, in my opinion. And yeah, again, too, this enhancing communication and collaboration, risk management. So basically, risk management integration. Again, GRCs can play a crucial role in enhancing the offensive security measures by, again, we constantly do risk assessments. Basically, it allows, again, that focus, gives offensive security that focus, so they know exactly what to focus on. And then bridging skill gaps. Again, kind of go back to the training, where actually you would want, GRC can identify skill gaps related to cybersecurity and compliance, any kind of frameworks that you have to follow. But they could actually, for example, a GRC, we could actually conduct a skill, a skills assessment across the organization in regards to any kind of compliance, say, again, I go back to PCI DSS because I had a lot of experience with PCI. Just even just have a skill, or even kind of security awareness training or internal, even email, say a little quiz saying, or even, just have an idea, are you familiar with this? Are you familiar with this? So basically, once you determine that, they come back to that skills assessment and you say, oh no, this is an issue, we have to go through this, we have to basically nail this down. Our organization has to be more aware of security issues, say around PCI, and that's when GRC can take it back and discuss it with the offensive security team as well. Who knows, maybe some of the offensive security team internally might not might have had a problem with it as well. And that kind of goes back to the feedback and adaptation. Adaptation. So basically, the GRC, they can actually kind of be the gatekeepers of any kind of feedback you would have. You could establish metrics for say again, they go and focus on the metrics for say the success rate of the any-time pen tests you have, how many attacks were successfully detected, how many, how much, if there's any kind of data exfiltrated. And kind of mentioned before, policy, again, go back to the documentation, policy development. As much as nobody likes to do it, it's very important. And again, too, this is now knowledge sharing. This is one thing here where, does anyone here in your organization, do you have a central repository for all of your information like SharePoint? Do you have any, is there any place for that? Yeah. A lot of organizations, do you guys have that? Tenable doesn't have that. Yeah, again, that's, yeah. Again, that's kind of, it's funny, I still work with organizations now where they don't have that, or they'll say, oh, we have some here, but oh no, we don't have that here. And especially if I'm doing a risk assessment for organizations or doing some advisory work, I'll ask them, for documentation, and they send me the 3 different locations to get this documentation, and I keep meeting, thank you. Yeah, we're good, we're at time. Okay, good. But yeah, so it's, again, you want to have some sort of central repository, especially for offensive security documentation as well. Like a lot of times companies don't want general, like, yes, obviously you do want setting certain controls where, certain access controls where only a certain group of people can see certain documentation. But I think it's overall that actually, I think for the good of the organization, you should actually have any kind of, like, even just executive summary reports of offensive security, or like of penetration tests, just so anyone in the organization can look at it and say, oh, okay, great, and then they say, well, feel better working for for a company that actually takes that seriously. So again, too, like you can actually, you want to kind of like, you want that central, please do that central repository of documentation. It makes everything easier. Not for internal people, for me as an external assessor, it just makes it that much easier. And again, too, that kind of aligns with the security with the business. That's kind of where we're actually, it's kind of like, especially in regards to GRC and offensive security, creates like cross-collaboration. So it actually kind of builds security as a whole. It kind of builds that security culture within the organization. And that can actually help make it, you know, your security posture will be even that much better. And then, again, we kind of mentioned that security posture. It creates that unified security posture. So it actually, again, you just basically secure by design just for the organization. And this will actually lead to leadership and culture. This will basically ensure that you want your senior leadership actively involved in any kind of cybersecurity issues in the organization. Because if you don't, you won't get any buy-in for any, like say, any internal security projects you want to do, or if you want to do any external penetration testing, especially if you're not required to do it, like say by like PCI or something like that. But again, I think it's actually good. I always recommend to organizations where you actually want to get something done at least on a yearly basis, even if you're not required to do it. It just you have a better idea of what needs to be done. Again, too, if I was working for an organization, I would say, you know, say our security side, I would say, listen, we need to get this done. We should at least do it once in a while. Heck, run Nesascan once in a while. A lot of people don't even do that. And again, so it's just something that really you need to. It's a huge thing to actually have, especially if you do have offensive security and GRC teams. You know, just get them working together well in the organization, and it creates that culture. So again, practical steps every time. Good. Practical steps for integration. Again, that we talked about that. The joint goal setting. You want to have align the strategic goals of both GRC and offensive security teams. And again, it would actually contribute greatly to the overall security objectives of the organization. And you want to create that communication collaboration framework where, say, you want to have regular meetings between GRC and offensive security sides. Like, has anyone ever have been any meetings with offensive security and any kind of government's risk compliance? Like in general, just having, oh, good. That's more than I thought. Because it just seems a lot of times organizations, they don't really talk together unless they absolutely have to. But again, you don't realize the insights that, especially on the offensive security side, could give to the overall, management team. If they don't, like a lot of times they don't even realize it unless there's an issue or a breach. But again, too, you had this in place, you probably wouldn't have a breach, or at least a less chance of a breach. And then, again, share processes and tools. You want to have, like, your risk assessment processes, you want to have kind of like a general, you want to have a tool that both offensive security and GRC can use effectively. So again, that's kind of, you want to have, like, tools you use, like, like Zen GRC or OneTrust or, Vanta. One of those, basically, that's kind of almost like the repository as well. So any kind of risk assessments that GRC side would do, and offensive security could actually go and review those, see those vulnerabilities, and test against those vulnerabilities. But again, you want to have a common tool where everyone has access, who needs access to it. That, like, again, offensive security normally wouldn't, but I think it's a good recommendation where a good practice where offensive security should have access to those tools, just so they would have a better understanding of what kind of risks that the GRC side has found. And again, we kind of mentioned both the training, cross-education. That's pretty much a no-brainer. Again, I kind of focus, I think, GRC should know what offensive security is doing. Offensive security should know what GRC is doing and have a better idea, like even just general concepts. It just helps the teams work much better together. And again, that would kind of, then that would lead to feedback and the continuous improvement. And also too, like, again, the feedback continues, part of that is actually like performance metrics. You know, you could actually have both teams, especially the GRC side, could actually kind of go through and say, okay, we'll determine performance metrics. Like say, you know, like the number of vulnerabilities addressed on this date. Just so you need something in place so it's easily, so they can easily understand the offensive security side on both sides of the house. So they know, since the offensive security knows what, you know, what they should focus on. And we're at the conclusion. So again, holistic risk management. So GRC teams focus on identifying and assessing and managing the risks, while offensive security teams simulate attacks to uncover vulnerabilities. So by working together, they can ensure that the risks are addressed in a, you know, kind of like a practical manner. Then improve compliance, that's pretty much, you know, that's pretty much says it all. Like offensive security, like any kind of reports, anything in the offensive security side will find can help GRC teams understand the gaps in compliance that they would have to abide by. So they would have a better understanding about what needs to be done. And then enhance security policies. Offensive security teams, they can provide, you know, provide insights that normally GRC would normally not have access to or wouldn't be aware of. So that the GRC team can actually use the information to update and refine like any kind of like security policies or procedures they have in place. And then kind of focus continuous improvement. So regular interactions between the two teams, again, creates that feedback loop. You know, you're better off for having that constant feedback loop in between both teams. Because if anything, it would actually just more like a continual like security strategy. So it actually, again, helps improve your security posture as a whole. And again, too, that's why the unified security strategy, we mentioned that. And then one thing I kind of really didn't mention about this is like kind of incident response. I didn't really include this because a lot of times offensive security teams especially aren't really involved in incident response, but they can provide valuable input during like incident response testing, like say for tabletops. When you're testing your internal incident response programs. So basically, it would actually allow GRC to go, oh, okay, then maybe we should throw this scenario in or that scenario in. So it actually, so basically this shows why I think it's so crucial that to mix GRC and offensive security. It's a lot of times where, again, the communication just really isn't there. But luckily, where I work, actually, we do have a lot of projects where, because we have a large red team. And a lot of times, they're on the same projects as me. I'd be brought on doing a risk assessment. So a lot of times, we talk back and forth, and especially for our purple team engagements. Actually, speaking of which, we're actually looking for someone. So if anyone's interested, we're actually looking for a purple. I was told to mention we're hiring for a purple team consultant. So if anyone's interested, reach out to me. It's actually not listed. It's not public. It's on the website. So they sent me a message last night. Oh, by the way, we're looking for a purple team. Let anyone know. But again, that's again too. Like a lot of times, you just want to basically have the teams working together as one cohesive whole. And that's it. Oh, I did it in time. Excellent. I found over. I know I kind of rocketed through that. I don't want to have lunch, so if anybody has any questions, let me know. But if not, feel free to scan that code, and that leads to my LinkedIn if you want to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from everyone. But again, thank you. Go have lunch.